everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Curious XX, a podcast where we celebrate dedicated women in STEM who are committed to pushing boundaries and creating lasting impact. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Persephone Borrow, Professor of Viral Immunology at the University of Oxford.
Hello. Well, it's lovely to be with you.
So Dr. Borrow graduated with a bachelor's with honors degree in natural sciences from the University of Cambridge, and she later obtained her Ph.D. from Cambridge as well. She's carried out postdoctoral research at the Scripps Research Institute in California, and then moved back to the UK to lead the viral immunology group at the Edward Jenner Institute for Vaccine Research. And now, of course, she works at Oxford University.
Dr. Borrow has a broad background in viral immunology, specifically investigating T cell and innate immunity. She has been engaged in HIV research since the early 1990s. Her research includes the principle of immune function and regulation that are applied to the developments of vaccines and therapeutic strategies for infections, such as of HIV, tumors, and other diseases.
And as someone looking to pursue immunology, I find Dr. Borr to be an incredible source of inspiration and certainly a big reason why I've come to love immunology. And in our interactions, her passion for her research and her fascination with immunological phenomena truly stand out in the way that she speaks about it. So I really hope to follow in her footsteps in my future. So let's dive in and hear a little bit from Dr. Borrow.
Well, thank you. I feel very flattered by that introduction, and it's very kind of you to invite me to come and join the podcast today.
Yeah, we're so happy that you're here to speak with us. So just to get started, we want to know a little bit about your background. So where did you grow up, and what did you study? What was your educational background, and how exactly did you get into the field of immunology?
Okay, well, I was actually born in London, but then when I was very young, my parents moved up to the north of England, and I actually grew up in the Peak District in England. And my parents actually had both been scientists, and my mother had been a chemist, but then she became a housewife because that was typically what happened when you had children at that time, if you were a woman. And my father continued his career, and he was actually a microbiologist, and he worked for what was then ICI, now AstraZeneca, and he was sort of interested in natural products and discovery of drugs from sort of plants and other natural sources. So I think I was exposed to a lot of science as a child, but not only to science actually, because my father also wrote plays, and he went on and wrote a book about the history of our village. So actually I think we had a very broad sort of range of interest that our parents exposed us to when we were little. And I think I've always just been interested in puzzles. And when I was at school, I loved history because you can delve back into history and you can put together pieces of information over time and try and understand how something was or what you can conclude from old documents. But equally, I loved science because you can look at facts and things that are around you and put those together and provide answers to questions by doing experiments. So I think I would have been very happy, I think, doing any of these things. And when I reached the stage at school where you were having to make big career decisions and think, oh, am I going to go into sciences or am I going to go into art subjects? We had a system at our school where you did a week of work experience. So I was about 16, I think, at the time. And you wrote to people who were in a career that you thought you might be interested in. And you thought, oh, you asked, can I come and shadow you and work with you for a week during my summer break? So I thought, great, I'd love to be an archaeologist, or I'd love to be a scientist. So I then thought, well, who can I write to, locally, who I could go and shadow as an archaeologist? And I couldn't really find anybody. And I thought, well, how many archaeologists are there really out there? And what kind of career prospects am I going to have if I become an archaeologist? And I thought, probably not such a great idea. So I couldn't find a work experience placement in that. So instead, I did a work experience placement in a lab in science. I absolutely loved it. And the rest is history from there.
That's so interesting how you shifted from archaeology to science. And you have such a cool background story. So we want to know, as you mentioned, you started working in a lab, but how did you get inspired and what inspired your love for science? If there's a particular experience or a consistent interest that you would like to share.
I think science is interesting because it's full of puzzles and unanswered questions, and each question that you answer often raises like 6 other questions. So it's a sort of never-ending quest for more information. There's always more that we can learn. And I think why I ended up doing immunology actually was very much chance. And to be completely honest, I think I would have been equally happy working on a lot of other different things as well. But again, that was actually when I'd finished school. Before I went to university, I wanted to get a job because obviously I needed to earn some money. But equally, I wanted to do something that would give me some valuable work type experience and give me some experience of working in a real science lab and not just doing practical experiments in a school setting. So I actually had contacted, it was in fact the company ICI where my father worked, and I asked them, did they have any opportunities for students to come and work for a year before they went to university? And completely by chance, I ended up being put into a lab that was doing immunology. And they were actually looking for adjuvants that would enhance responses, particularly production of antibodies in the mucosal tissues, particularly the gut tissues. And I went into this lab. I'd never sort of been in a real lab before. And what I was doing was actually something that, in retrospect, it was very mundane. I was running sort of the same type of assay over and over and over. But to me, at that age, it was just thrillingly exciting. I learned how to use all the equipment. I learned about what they were doing. And obviously, I wanted to know more about the kinds of questions that we were addressing in the work that we were doing in that lab. So I read an awful lot at that time about immunology. And I thought, wow, immunology is really interesting. There's so much that's going on here. So I think at the time I went to university, I took a broad range of courses at university. But I think I'd always at that point had this kind of enthusiasm for immunology, and then chose courses that would direct me in that sort of direction in future.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's so fascinating to think about how our lives are driven sometimes purely by chance and by luck. But like you said, I think that the fact you found something so mundane, so interesting, maybe, you were always suited for immunology, and that was just the moment in your life that you happened to encounter. Yeah. So now that you've chosen this path, can you tell us a bit about your day as a viral immunologist? So how's your schedule like? What does a typical day look like? And did it meet up to your expectations of being in immunology?
So I think what your day is like as an immunologist really varies hugely depending on what career stage you're at and what kind of setting you work in. So when you start out as an immunologist early on, and maybe at that stage you're doing a project that might, for example, be going to get you something like an MSc or a PhD degree, and you're doing lab-based research for that, then you'll be spending a large part of your time in the lab. You'll also have a desk where you'll kind of like do reading, you'll plan out the experiments you want to do, and you might analyze the data that you've obtained. But a large part of the time is actually spent in the lab. You're moving around, you're using equipment, doing various different techniques. And that's actually continues if maybe then you've got a higher degree like a PhD, and then maybe you go on in an academic or an industry setting to do postdoctoral research. And again, you'll largely be spending the day doing experimental work. And obviously you will have periods where you sit down and you plan things and you analyze the data and you read papers and you kind of think about what the next steps in the work might be, you know, building on what you've just learned from the experiments that you just did. But then you reach a stage where, particularly in academia, you're becoming a little bit more senior. And in order to progress in your career, you're increasingly encouraged to try and raise funding for the research that you're doing yourself, so that you can start to build an independent research team and take research forward in directions that, you know, you will be kind of steering the entire project rather than your component of the research. So when you reach that stage, now you switch to doing more writing. And then if you're successful and you bring in the grant funding, now you have people who are working with you, and your role is actually changing, and you're managing people and you're mentoring, and you have a lot more responsibilities of sort of managing budgets, and your whole time moves away from the lab. And right now, I rarely go in the lab at all. So I spend most of my time in a typical day in an office setting. The best bits of my day are when I'm meeting with members of the team, discussing, you know, what they've been doing, looking at their latest results. Maybe something's gone wrong and we need to try and figure out why we didn't get a result that we expected, or maybe they found something that we don't understand. Maybe they found something really exciting. And I like sort of reading, and it's good to read the literature very broadly and kind of think about how something that, you know, might seem totally unrelated to what we work on actually maybe have some bearing on it, or we could use the method. So that's the best bit of my day. There's also a lot of my day, which is sort of more project management, planning things, dealing with budgets, dealing with sort of, you know, managing the team. And obviously, that kind of thing needs to be done. That's not where my heart is. I enjoy the science. And again, you could have a completely different career again if you had gone, for example, into an industrial career. And there are lots of other things that, you know, if you've got a degree and some postdoctoral research experience, you can go on in very different career directions that could give you a different kind of day.
That's really cool. It sounds like immunology is a very versatile career. And there's a lot of things that you can do other than just experimenting and research, but also writing. So we would want to know what some exciting research is that you have worked on or you're currently working on that you would like to share with the audience.
So a major driver of a lot of the work that our group does is the fact that we don't have an effective vaccine to prevent infection with HIV, which is the virus that causes AIDS. And we also don't have really good curative strategies. So there's antiretroviral treatments that are available, which will actually control viral replication in people who are living with HIV, but it doesn't actually eradicate the virus. And actually, this gives you know, people will now have a much more normal lifespan. They're not dying of AIDS within a few years of infection, but they actually have ongoing low-level inflammation because of the continuous presence of virus. And that actually means they undergo sort of immune aging, and they actually do sort of suffer from more diseases as they get older than someone who isn't living with HIV. So there really is a need also to get those people off the antiretroviral treatment, which they need to keep for life. That's very costly. It can have side effects, and the virus can evolve to become resistant. So we need better cures as well to actually eradicate infection. And so what we're interested in is how we can harness the immune system to create an effective vaccine or better therapeutic strategies. And this is really fascinating from a basic science perspective, because HIV is really the most interesting virus. It's evolved lots and lots of strategies for actually evading control by the immune responses that the host is mounting. And that's what enables it to be able to persist so effectively. So as far as we know, pretty much everyone who develops a sort of systemic infection with HIV goes on to be persistently infected with the virus. People don't naturally eradicate it. So what we need to be able to do is outwit the virus and come up with a strategy for inducing immune responses that will actually block infection with the virus or eradicate it very quickly after you first become infected. Or alternatively, when someone is now living with HIV, to actually eradicate infection from the body. So many of the vaccines that you might have received for other viral infections, the way that they work is predominantly, not always entirely, by inducing antibodies that actually will block infection with the virus. So the antibodies will prevent the virus from being able to get inside the cells that it needs to enter in order to make more copies of itself and create new virus particles and go on and spread. But in the case of HIV, it's actually incredibly difficult to generate antibodies that would block infection with any of the many very diverse different circulating variants of HIV that there now are. And that's what the problem is with sort of trying to create an antibody-based vaccine to block establishment of HIV infection. So what you would need in order to block infection is something called a broadly neutralizing antibody. So that would be one that would be able to block infection with any one of those many different circulating HIV strains. And that type of antibody would need to target one of the very few sites on the virus. And the protein that we're targeting is the envelope protein that the virus uses to attach to host cells and get into the cell to multiply inside. So we'd need to target one of the few sites on that protein, which is relatively conserved in all those different viruses. And there are actually some sites which are relatively conserved. But this is where an example of how the virus has evolved to really evade host defenses. So all of those relatively conserved sites actually look quite like components in your own body. So many of them are composed of sugars, and because the virus is replicating inside cells of the host, it's actually using the host cell glycosylation machinery to put these sugars onto its virally encoded proteins. And so the sugars are actually quite self-like. So that's an example, for example, of how these antibody binding sites can be, the antibody is binding to something that looks quite like self. Now, your immune system has been trained not to respond to something that is your own self body. And in fact, when that goes wrong, that's when people develop autoimmune diseases. So because of this, when you try to stimulate immune responses to these conserved sites on the HIV virus, what you're almost asking the body to do is to make a response almost to itself. And it's not entirely itself, but something very similar to self. And that's quite a difficult thing to get the immune system to do. So what we're trying to understand is how can we overcome that roadblock and actually induce antibodies that would target these important sites on the virus and actually give us protection against HIV. And you said in your introduction that I work mainly on T cells and innate responses. So T cells actually come into this picture because CD4 T cells actually provide really crucial help to B cells in order to mature to produce the kinds of antibodies that we need for an effective vaccine for HIV. And we're trying to understand how can we get the best T cell response to help these B cells, and also how can we bring in all of the innate response potentially by using the right kinds of adjuvants that activate, the immune system in a vaccine to trigger the right kinds of B cell and T cell responses to give us protection. Another way a vaccine could work, as well as through inducing these antibodies that will block infection, would be to give us T cells that could actually eradicate infection very quickly after the virus has got into the body and just is beginning to spread. And so another thing that we're also interested in is how could we, with a vaccine, induce T cell responses, and this would now be CD8 T cell effector responses probably, that might actually target HIV rapidly enough and eradicate it from the sites where it may be going to establish persistence in the body. And so that's something else that we work on too.
Wow. Yeah, it's really interesting that just for this one virus, there's just so much complexity that you have to go into. And then to think about how many different kinds of viruses we have and how each of them have their own methods and strategies to evade the immune response. Like, how on earth could we possibly?
But they're not all as good as HIV. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we made, this is something I'm often asked, how is it that we made vaccines for, combating COVID? We made those vaccines in a year. And we've been working for 35 years now, and we still don't have a vaccine for HIV. So what are you lazy HIV immunologists doing, and why don't we have an HIV vaccine? And I think the answer is, when, the COVID pandemic started, there was basically one virus, and that one virus had spread very rapidly all around the world. So you were looking to make a vaccine that was actually, with all the expertise we had in vaccine manufacture, a sort of fairly easy thing to do because you were trying to target one virus. And you look at the global diversity of HIV, and compare to that, and you can see how the magnitude of the problem is really, really different. So I think we do have very effective vaccines for many different virus infections already. And I think, yes, there are certain, and these are the really interesting ones to work on, which are much tougher challenges, and HIV is a good example there.
Yeah, I think with COVID as well, what you were talking about, the broadly neutralizing antibodies, how we can evoke that kind of immune response. I think the evolution of viruses with immune pressure is such a problem today with all sorts of viruses. And yes, your work is extremely relevant. The kinds of vaccines you're trying to develop with helper T cells as well as killer T cells. It's all really, really interesting work. Yeah. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we hope that what we're learning from HIV, and in fact, there is evidence of this already, is going to be applicable not just to HIV, but to other, viruses as well. And I mean, the example you mentioned, is a really good one, because we started off and, there was SARS-CoV-2, pretty much one strain, but then it rapidly has started to mutate. And now, I think many people are aware there are lots of different variants starting to emerge. Still tiny, tiny variation compared to what there is in HIV, but there is variation. And I think this obviously the concern is that there are other related viruses that could get into people from animal populations again. And, there's historic evidence of this. So again, I think if you had broadly neutralizing antibodies that would, target a breadth of different coronaviruses, again, that could give you protection, not just against the viruses circulating in humans at the moment, but maybe future pandemics. And I think some of the principles of the way that we're going about tackling the HIV question are equally relevant to SARS, infections and, other things too, like influenza. So yes, there's a lot that can be learned. This is where kind of thinking outside your own immediate field is really important.
yeah, definitely. So just as an extension to this, why do you think that immunology as a field and working in immunology is so relevant in today's world, but also in the future?
So I think when you think about the number of lives that vaccination has saved, and I'm talking not just about viruses now, but, bacteria, parasites, everything else that's out there. You can already see that's one area where immunology has had a huge impact on human health. But that's only just a tiny part of what immunology is important for. So another huge area where there's a big explosion of interest at the moment, and this is something that we're doing a little bit of work on as well now, because I'm part of, in fact, a Centre for Immuno-Oncology in the University of Oxford, is actually using the immune system to target cancer. And this is something that naturally your immune system is not only there to protect you against infections with various different pathogens, it's also there to detect whether anything is going wrong with cells in your body, and it will actually also target sort of cells that are sort of precancerous and actually stop you from developing a lot of different cancers. And now, it's increasingly recognized what are some of the things that go wrong when somebody has developed some sort of cancer and they're not actually effectively controlling it with the immune system. And it's really fascinating because there's so many parallels between what we think about when we've got a chronic infection with HIV and someone is living with HIV, and the virus is replicating within their host cells. And it's a very similar problem when it's actually your own cells that have gone wrong and are there and are multiplying in the context, of a tumor, for example. So a lot of the immunological challenges and the things that then go wrong with the immune response and stop it from being able to sort of combat either the infection or the tumor, they're very similar. And so, for example, for cancers, people are using what they call checkpoint inhibition strategies. And these are basically a tumor, for example, will start to sort of express inhibitory molecules on its surface that then actually will bind to receptors on T cells and actually inhibit the function of those T cells. And that's just one example. And one thing that we can try and do is to block the interaction between the inhibitory receptor on the T cell and its ligand, and actually rejuvenate the T cell response so that it will combat the tumor effectively. And very similar things are actually happening in the context of a chronic viral infection. And again, these T cells, they get inhibited. And another thing that can happen is, T cells are becoming exposed to so much stimulation all the time because there's so many cancer cells there or so many infected cells, and they're there continuously, that the T cell function becomes exhausted. And what can we do? And actually very similar strategies can be applied in both settings. So that's yet another example of how we can harness the immune system and rejuvenate it in immunology to, combat a really important sort of source of human sort of disease. Another thing I mentioned that you don't attack your own body, otherwise you'd get autoimmune diseases. Well, obviously people do get autoimmune diseases, so we can understand again with immunology, well, what's going wrong there and how could we intervene and stop this from happening? So again, to ameliorate and prevent autoimmune diseases, and again, they have a very important clinical impact. And I think it's increasingly recognized that there's a lot of crosstalk between the immune system and other things going on in the body. So particularly crosstalk between the immune system and the central nervous system. And again, there are a number of CNS diseases where there certainly either is known to be or could be some immune system related links. So I think there's a huge amount that we still really don't know, and lots of potential to apply this to improve not only human health actually, but also animal health, which is really important in terms of sort of One Health strategy, in terms of sustainability and ensuring people have good environments. So lots and lots to do with immunology.
Wow, there's just so much potential for the field. And there's potential to think outside the box. There's potential within what's already been discovered, there's so much to do with vaccines and even exciting discoveries like immuno-oncology, which is targeting cancer um, through your immune system. Since there's just so much potential in this field, I want to ask, how is innovation that's happening currently in the world, especially with developments like AI, how is that impacting immunology?
I think AI is a tool that you can actually harness to analyze huge quantities of data and distill out something that, just one person on their own wouldn't be able to see that pattern or pull out that information. And I think increasingly people are using AI approaches to try to answer questions in immunology that, maybe we do have a lot of data about something, and how can we then harness all that data to understand the answer to a particular question in immunology. So I think sort of AI tools do have application in immunology, as in many other scientific fields. And that's beyond all the other things that you can use AI for, which maybe, you're using in your daily life to sort of, help you with perhaps writing something. I would just say with AI, though, you must have a word of caution. If you search for anything on Google, it will come up with an AI generated answer. I would advise anybody who does that, not just to read what the AI answer is. So you've asked it a question, it says yes, da da da. Then I think what you need to do is it will then give you references, and there will be a link to the source which actually enabled it to draw that conclusion and tell you that the answer to the question was yes. And I think it's really important that you actually then go to that source and read what the source actually said, because it's something that I've tried out, and it's actually interesting. Sometimes it doesn't give you the right answer. I know what the right answer is. And in fact, when you look at the sources it's used, it's because often there's more complexity there in the scientific literature than, the AI tool has really kind of connected the pieces and realized. And sometimes it's sort of taking a sentence or two of text out of something out of context. So, I think AI is a fantastic tool, but, we need to also be thinking ourselves. And, also, I think in terms of creativity, AI is starting to sort of become more creative, but that's a whole discussion for another day. Can it really replace human creativity?
Yeah, definitely. This is why I think that AI can definitely help us accelerate things like data analysis, maybe, but definitely not take over the job of thinking like a scientist, asking why, and embracing that complexity, making those connections. Um, yeah, but definitely AI will play an important role in the future of immunology. So now just moving to women in STEM. We wanted to ask, in your opinion, what do you think are the biggest factors that dissuade girls and young women from pursuing STEM fields in the first place?
So I think that for some girls, there is still this sort of notion that there are certain kinds of careers that, girls go into, and certain kinds of careers that boys go into. And I think it's sometimes quite easy for young girls in schools to sort of almost be brainwashed into this sort of mentality. Oh, the sciences are the boys' subjects, and there are art subjects, and those are more for girls. I think I was very lucky in that the high school that I went to was actually an all-girls high school. So there was none of this. We were all girls, and any subject was up for grabs, and you were not discouraged in any way from doing anything. So I would encourage any young girls out there, just do what you're really interested in and don't listen to what people may be saying. I think increasingly this kind of thinking is starting to change, and girls are being sort of encouraged more to really believe, you can do anything and there aren't boy subjects and girl subjects in any way like that. So I think that that's something where maybe historically there has been more of a roadblock for sort of people to get into a scientific career. Actually, when you look at sort of the people who are in higher education, I think certainly for the biological sciences, if anything, there's perhaps often more girls, or certainly at least as more girls. I think it's perhaps more things like sort of physics and maths, and maybe engineering as well, which isn't exactly the same as a science, but those kinds of subjects, I think there you do tend to have fewer girls who have chosen that kind of career path. And I think in the biological sciences, at the earlier career stages, in fact, often in academia, there do tend to be more women than there are men at the earlier career stages. So at the later career stages, even in the biological sciences, there does now tend, even nowadays, to be tend to be more men than there are women. And I think one of the key reasons for that is that at a certain age, women frequently feel that they would like to have children. And certainly, it was something I wanted to do. And I think no matter how supportive a husband you have, it will always be the woman who actually is carrying the child, is having the baby. And even if you sort of both are equally sharing, looking after the child, somehow I think women do have a tendency to want to sort of spend, time with the child. And it doesn't mean that the man doesn't as well. But I think very frequently what happens is that women do tend to either drop out of science, or maybe because they haven't been sort of committing 24/7 working and effort and attention to their career, they do tend to maybe be slower to publish and get those important, papers out to be able to compete successfully for grant funding. And I do think, I see this, in the sort of postdoctoral, sort of senior postdoctoral people that I mentor. And as I say, there are definitely situations where, the man or they have some other partner who is going to sort of take on more of the caring role. But frequently, women actually want to do this. Or maybe they have, a partner who isn't supportive of, taking on such a large role. And I do think that is a big point at which women do tend to kind of like, they are at a disadvantage. And I think always, somebody said to me once, and I totally agree with this, you have children now, maybe they're a little bit older, but who will it be who goes out and buys all the birthday presents? It's probably going to be the mother who is thinking about that, and not necessarily the father. So I think when you think about just the way that things work, I think that this is often a big cause of women dropping out of science careers.
Yeah, I think what you shared about the number of women decreasing as you go higher up in the ranks kind of makes sense. And I've observed that, especially when you see the number of women CEOs versus the number of men CEOs. So just for our audience to know, what are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced in your role as a woman, and how have you tackled them?
I think probably to me, the key challenge is that there just aren't enough hours in the day. And there are so many things that you want to do, and there's always more to do in a science career. There are always more things that you could be reading, and always tasks that I haven't got to. And I think then, particularly, if you do have a family and you obviously want to spend time, taking care of things at home, it can be a real challenge sometimes to manage to prioritize and get all the really important things done. And I think, the key thing to remember is that when your children grow up, they're never going to really remember if the kitchen floor was that clean. What they're going to remember is the time that you spent with them. So focus on prioritizing the things that are really important. And that way, then it is possible to have a family and have a really rewarding career as well. But it is challenging, and you just have to be a good time manager.
Yeah, definitely. I think the number one challenge for people in any career as a woman is just prioritizing what matters and creating more time in the day to do everything that you want to do. So now more about your challenges in your career. Since you're in science, you probably have to have a lot of patience sometimes, whether it's your lab work, whether it's your research work. So how do you deal with that uncertainty and that waiting, and what inspires you to keep going in your career?
So I think a key thing is the excitement of the potential of what you might find out, and the questions that you can address, and the fact that it is really interesting work that you're doing, and also keeping in mind also the clinical need for the research that you're doing, and thinking about people living with HIV, or people who may be at risk of acquiring infections. And obviously you do have a motivation to want to try to be able to do something that would help in that setting. But I think, yes, I mean, you're right that when you're doing lab-based research, it sounds, oh, I'm doing experiments, it's really exciting. But a lot of it is actually quite, repetitious, and you're doing similar kinds of things over and over. And you have to be really careful with what you're doing, make things reproducible, really concentrate. And sometimes really concentrating on a job that's actually quite boring, and you can be there for hours doing one particular thing. Yes, it can become, monotonous at times, but I think my head is always full of lots of things that I'm thinking about that are interesting as well. So, I think it isn't really too difficult a thing to be able to sort of keep going through all of that. I would say another thing that happens, and this frequently happens, is that you do something and you do it to the best of your ability, and it doesn't work out, and the experiment just fails. And again, you may have to try multiple times to actually get something right, to sort of be able to tell you the answer to the question that you want. And I think there, what you have to focus on is, okay, well, why did it go wrong? And what is it I can change? And again, think of it as a little mystery and a puzzle to try and sort that out. And then, you don't get so discouraged by the fact that, oh no, this was the 15th time I did this, and it still hasn't, given me what I wanted.
Yeah, I think so much of having a science career is having perseverance and really um, pushing through and getting the work done, getting the experiment to work and all of that. Um, so I think what you said was totally on point. So now this question is kind of a switch from what we're talking about. But do you think being a woman brings a different perspective to scientific research or the way you navigate your career? Because just being being a woman myself and interested in science, I know that a lot of times I have a different like thought process from my male counterparts. I don't know if that makes sense. But do you think that you maybe have had a different perspective on scientific research and yeah, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think your perspective on an area of science is often shaped by your sort of previous exposures and career path and history. And this is something I actually say when I have, a student who's maybe studied for a PhD within the group, and they've obviously been doing research in the group, and they've listened to sort of all the ideas that our group believe in, and our theories and our hypotheses. And, I often say to them, well, it's actually a good time when you finished your PhD, to maybe think about, moving into a different environment in a different lab somewhere. and then you'll have another whole set of ideas. I mean, maybe our group's hypotheses and ideas about, how everything is working and what are the most important, sort of questions, they're not actually, correct, or maybe we're correct, but somebody else is correct as well. And I think having different viewpoints. So I feel in a way that rather than the fact that I'm a woman, more the sort of career experiences I've had, the people that I've interacted with, and also, colleagues. I mean, we have, I have really fantastic colleagues and collaborators, and, I think you learn such a lot from them and are really inspired by them, and having the chance to discuss things, I think is really important. And possibly I'm saying this because I'm from the UK, but for us in the UK, having, afternoon tea breaks is a really important thing. And particularly not just women, but men as well, having the opportunity to have, a tea break in the morning and or in the afternoon is actually sometimes a really good chance just to chat to other people. And, maybe you'll just have a chance conversation with somebody who works on something completely different. And you might tell them a bit about what you're doing, and they have their perspective, which is very different. So, possibly a predilection for wanting to have afternoon tea is a good thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We were actually talking about this the other day with another one of our guests, and the point that you don't have to think that being a woman is the biggest part of your identity, right? When you're a scientist, when you're a researcher, because your peers, your interactions, your environment, and your past experiences, they all contribute to your perspective in different ways. So now just moving on to something that might help young listeners out there who want to get into science. What are the sort of skills that you use a lot that you think would be useful for young girls out there to develop to prepare for a career in science or in immunology in specific?
So I think in terms of subjects that you want to take, early on in school, I mean, I think maths is important. Whatever branch of science that you want to go into, you need to have at least a good working basic mathematical knowledge. And I think in the biological sciences, it's actually important as well to have at least a reasonable understanding of chemistry. But I think there are sort of obviously there's things that you learn, and anybody can read something and learn about something. But I think it's more a sense of being able to really sort of ask, well, what is the really key question here? And I think that's very, very important to really not just go ahead and do something and generate a bunch of data that's going to describe something. You want to actually ask, okay, so what's the question that I really want to answer? And what kind of, how can I design an experiment in a sort of way to really give me a clear answer as to whether this hypothesis is correct and this one isn't, and that will move me towards whatever goal it is that I'm working towards in science. And I would say, for young women in science, just if science is what inspires you and you feel passionate about it, don't get put off. Don't listen to what other people say. Just go for it.
Thank you so much for that advice, Dr. Borrow. And I think those are some tangible skills that people who are interested in science can really definitely pick up along the way. So this is our final question for you today. What advice would you like to share to young girls interested in science, or just young girls who are entering a male-dominated STEM field?
Yes, I think just, don't be put down by anything that anyone else is going to say to you. Don't be put off if people tell you you're not good enough and that this is not the appropriate career path for you. If you want to do it and you're prepared to work hard and go for it, I think then women have, really good abilities to do these things, and don't let anybody tell you anything otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, that advice is really on point, and I think that everyone who's heard this is definitely going to be super inspired after hearing your story. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Curious XX today. You've taken us on such a rich journey from your early exposure to science, your love for puzzles, and then to the chance that you got your first lab job that sparked your interest in immunology. You've shown us how versatile and rewarding a career in science and in immunology can be, from telling us about the day-to-day life of an academic researcher, and then to pioneering studies like the one you've done related to HIV, and also sharing some, like latest research relating to immuno-oncology, and also encouraging the audience along the way to think about stuff beyond, just your field, but also, the wider world. What really, really stood out to me was your passion, not just for immunology, but also for the bigger picture of science, and the future of health and medicine. Your perspective on the role of AI also reminded us that science really comes from curiosity, creativity, and perseverance, and that's super, super important. So, thank you so much for this conversation. Your passion, your resilience, and your insight are an inspiration for us, and I hope for those who are watching as well. Um, yeah, so for those who want to follow in your footsteps, and for anyone who is navigating a scientific career or wants to pursue one, I really hope this has been helpful. And thank you so much, Dr. Borrow.
Thank
Oh, it was my
you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really great that you could speak to us today. Thank you.